Really be here was the way I wanted to start this talk, or alternatively, I'm really lucky to be here because 12 years ago I was following my passion of cycling, and I was cycling across Tibet, and we were going to the Everest base camp. This is with a group of one person I knew and I didn't know the others. They were all much younger and much fitter and much more energetic than I was, and I got halfway across Tibet when I suffered a stroke, and it was a combination of all sorts of things. It was altitude sickness, it was dehydration, high blood pressure, all the things you shouldn't have, but they all came at once. And I was lucky to survive that, and I got piggybacked to the local hospital. The local hospital was a bit like a country doctor's practice, and I got piggybacked back to the hotel, and then I was left there. I couldn't walk, I couldn't pee, I couldn't do anything. I was just left in the hotel. I thought this is the end. And the next day I got transported to Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, in a converted Ford van, which was the local ambulance, which was not a pleasant experience. However, I got to the Chinese military hospital, which is where somehow I ended up. I think it was probably because of the insurance. Having good travel insurance is really worthwhile, I assure you. And I was in this room, which wasn't very promising, with two other people, both of whom were dying. And I thought, oh, this is something in common here. Was I doing that as well? And then in the middle of the night, on the second night I was there, I wake up with smoke and really hot feet. And I looked down, and the blanket that was covering me was burning. And the smoke was coming right through the room. And what had happened is I was in the bed nearest the door, and the person looking after that person flicked their cigarette butt across the bed that landed on my bed. So that was the second opportunity to do me in. And then I got home and I had a second stroke because, again, I thought you shouldn't do a lot of vigorous exercise soon after you had a stroke. It didn't make sense. Why wouldn't it dislodge another piece of plaque? And in fact, I was told by the medicos that no, that wasn't the case. But in reality, I had a small stroke, and then about 5 years ago, they did research which proved I'd been right. Didn't help me though, did it? So the end result of this is that I don't feel as fluent as I used to. I don't feel quite as confident as a speaker as I used to. And my left side's a bit weak. Therefore my balance isn't very good. And therefore at school today, going up and down those steps without a handrail was a real struggle. The other thing that's a bit unusual about being here is there are three of us that got this award. And when you listen to the backgrounds of the other two, it's quite overwhelming, particularly Peter Burns' background, which is quite amazing. But I'm the only one that has to represent the three of us. And also, as you get older, people drop off. So if you don't get a move on and get this award, there's not much time left. So I haven't heard of anyone getting this posthumously yet. Now, when I was told this was going to happen, this award, it generated a lot of reflection. I mean, we all reflect on our lives, but this generated a lot of reflection, and I came to certain conclusions, I suppose. And some of these include things about school, but I'm really talking about how life evolves, including school, rather than particularly talking about school. However, I think if you think about school, it's a microcosm of real life. You have disappointments, you have excitement, you have successes, you have failures, you have things you're embarrassed about. I think we've all got, if you go back to your school days, I'm sure there are one or two things you can think of that you'd be embarrassed about. I can think of one in particular. I won't tell you what it is, but you go through all these things, and I was saying to the school today that things don't change much. We had our 50th year reunion 10 years ago, and people who were boring at school are still boring. People who are excited and animated are still excited and animated. People who are fearful one in particular I can think of, was always fearful. So I was trying to say to the school today that if you want to try and make any change, now's the time to try and do it. And if you want to be more positive, for example, now's the time to do it. Sorry, I'm adapting what I was saying to the school tonight, and it's a bit different because you look a bit older than the guys today. Somewhat older anyway.
We could change.
Bit late, I think. And then if you look at school itself, I think you look back and you think you learn information, facts. I don't retain much of that. I can't remember any of my Latin. I can't remember a lot of different things about the facts. But you learn techniques and ways of learning and ways of researching. And I think more than anything else, and you've heard it from both Dan and Nick tonight, you learn attitudes. And you learn to set the scene for how your life's actually going to be. And I think one of the next reflections was what sort of themes have run through my life. I'm sorry, you don't normally stand here and talk about your own life, but that's what I've been invited to do, so you've got to indulge me somewhat. The first one is, there are 3 or 4 of them, resilience, and I think the ability to bounce back. And one story which those who are close to my vintage may have some knowledge about, there were 2 of us that were prefects in the 6th form, and one of us was going to become head prefect. And I was visited at home by one of the senior staff saying that I wasn't the one that was going to get the head prefect's role. And the reason was that the other person was better known because his brother had been head prefect a few years before. So it's not the fact that you didn't get the role, it's the fact the reason was not exactly something that was easy to deal with. However, I think with resilience you've got to bounce back, and that's historical, obviously. And then starting up in the business that I've first started on, which I'll talk about in a moment, you go through so many things and you think, I've got to give up, I can't do this, I'm not going to succeed. And so many times you want to walk away from it, but you've got to bounce back. A number of other things. One is back in about 1990, some of you will remember there was a recession that started sort of in 1987, and we had far too much space in our business that we were renting, and therefore the costs were too great. We didn't have the income to take us through that period, and some lawyer advised us to go into receivership, and I thought, no, I don't like this. And then 2 nights later, I was sitting on the toilet, would you believe, and I thought, no, you have revelations in the shower, well, you can have them on the toilet too, I assure you. So I thought, no, we're not going to do this. And I thought of all the things you could do, that we did do, to survive. And we did survive and prosper. But again, I think that's resilience. And then a couple of other things in this category, I feel the fear and do it anyway. So there's so many things I think that we are faced with, and we choose whether to go with them or not go with them. For example, I can give you a couple of simple examples, none of them to do with school. My future wife and I were hitchhiking around Europe after we left these shores, and we were going down the coast of Spain. There were no rides to be had. So we got on a boat that was going to North Africa. We didn't know where in North Africa. So we got there and we hitchhiked across North Africa with all sorts of adventures. But if I look at that now, I'd be too fearful to do anything like that, I'm sure. So I think it's feel the fear and do it anyway is one of the themes I've probably followed. And then another one, which is not fitting in as much with what Dan and Nick are saying, is that we make so many decisions based on logic and analysis, whereas I believe strongly in basing decisions at least as much on feelings. You've got to feel good about things. And the businesses I've been involved in, there are 3 things. One is it a good concept? Second is, does it have a good market opportunity? And thirdly, how do you feel about the person that's going to run it? Is that person a believer? Are they strong? Are they committed? That sort of thing. So that's the third one, and the last one follows from that, and that is, I believe you've got to follow your passions, you've got to follow your dreams, and if you don't follow those, you don't live a full life. And I'll give you a negative example. When I first started at King's, before I came to King's, I played hockey, and I enjoyed hockey, and I enrolled for hockey, and then a teacher that you will all know came along to me and said, no, we think you should be playing rugby. And that was Ray Hamilton. And he persuaded me, bullied me, persuaded me, whichever way I want to look at it, to play rugby when I was a mediocre rugby player. I was second 15, sometimes first 15, but I wasn't a good rugby player. And then I went back to hockey. Where's Bob? Bob Glass, and I played with King's High School old boys at university, and I wish I'd played the whole way through. So again, it's following what you believe in rather than getting influenced by people that can lead you astray, if you like. And then the next one that relates to school is, I believe the subjects you do have got to be the ones you really enjoy doing. And geography was the subject that I really enjoyed. But when you got to the fifth form, was it, where you had, in the academic stream, you chose between the arts and languages or sciences, but there was nothing in the middle for someone like me. And so I had to do sixth form, or was it seventh form, not just 6A, geography on my own with John Huggett helping me along on the side. So again, it was choosing what I wanted to do rather than being pushed into a particular area. And then I carried on with that at university because I'm a generalist rather than specialist in geography. I remember Ron Lister, some of you, Hugh, wherever Hugh is, who was the head of the geography department. I remember him saying one day that geographers often can become good leaders in business. And I'd never even thought about going into business, but he was right, because it's a generalist view of things that I take. I could go through a number of other things like this, but cycling is my interest and passion. And do it now. Because I started cycling, and people would say, what are you going to do? And I'd say, I'm going to cycle across Europe. And then all of a sudden, I was up in New Caledonia with a group of 80 people who were cycling around New Caledonia. And someone said to me, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to go around across Europe. And I thought, do it! Stop talking about it. Just actions speak far louder than words. So 2 weeks later, I found a map, a big Michelin map with Vienna on that side and Paris on that side. And a week later, I was on a plane with my bike, and I biked across Europe. And again, that's, while I was doing this, I had several mantras that I developed to keep me alive. One was, but that's okay. And I remember one Sunday afternoon, it was pouring with rain, headwind and hills, and I thought, why am I doing this? And then I thought, but that's okay, because I chose. When you choose, you've got to own what you take on. So I chose to do it, and this mantra got repeated many, many times, but that's okay. Several others, but one in particular was, you think when you're cycling, it's all about the body, it's all about how you're feeling, are you physically fit and all the rest of it. But I found it was more about soul, especially biking on my own. You lived in your own head, you're independent, you didn't have anything, no motors, just you, your bike, a few other bits and pieces, and a credit card, thank goodness. Because if you don't have the credit card or some money, you're a bit stuck. So there were a number of those sorts of things that came out of cycling for me. And then through this reflection, I also came up with a list, a random list, totally random, of what I would have classed as things that stood out for me in my life. And it's funnily enough, none of them were material things. And I've broken them down a little bit into, these aren't all of them, but this is a random collection of them. The business ones, when I first started my business, I didn't really know what I was doing. And I didn't have any money. I borrowed $5,000 from my father, and we took a little office in Queen Street in Auckland, actually overlooking Queen Street. Bought a desk that had been the Mayor of Takapuna's big desk, an old desk. And first few days we didn't even have a chair, so we had a pile of old phone books. And because you had nothing, you had to make the most of everything. So we'd polish the desk. Anytime anyone was coming into the office, you'd polish the desk. And I don't like heights. I hate heights. But I used to climb out, I can remember now, every weekend I'd climb out over Queen Street. It was only on the second floor. Hang out the windows and clean the windows. Because when you've got very little, you've got to make the most of what you've got. And then there was cold calling. We won't go into that. And then after 3 months, I thought, I placed one person in a job, and that person had been someone that had been given to me by a friend who also had the job. So it was something like $300 way back then, and it was near the end, and I thought, right, I've got to find something else. So I looked around and found there was no one specialising in things like engineering and construction. I thought I'd give myself 3 months. At the end of 3 months, I knew that was actually going to work. So I could tell you a lot more stories about that, but I won't, just because we're running out of time. But one of the key things that I took away from the business is I really enjoy inspiring others, leading others, empowering other people. And I think one of the best tests of that from my point of view is there are a number of recruitment businesses in Auckland now that have been started and are doing really well by people that used to work for me. Another example of that would be the Project Kiwi Trust, where I'm chairperson. It just got the award a few weeks ago of the top community Kiwi Conservation Trust in New Zealand. And we've got an absolutely brilliant person who was a teacher running it. But she was so used to being controlled and boxed in and just doing what was right all the time. And so I would feel really proud of opening her thinking and her views on all that up from being a narrow little regional or local thing on the Coromandel Peninsula to something that's now a national entity. So things like that, I'm sorry I'm telling my story, it sounds boring, doesn't it? It's getting to me a little bit. So let's move on quickly. Other things on this list were cycling, which we've already touched on. The Work Choice Trust, which we ran for 20 years, which was linking year 12 students to employers. They'd go on 2 different visits in one day. In the first year, it was only, unfortunately, never got to Dunedin, but the first year it was in Auckland, Wellington, I think Christchurch. We had 10,000 pupils out in one day. We had all the buses that were available in those cities to get pupils out to these places. And during that time, we went for about 20 years, and just passed that over to another organisation not so long ago. Now, the next thing on this list is... No, I missed that one out. The next one I'd put as a highlight would be the not having my stroke, but the stroke recovery process, because I couldn't find any books. The assistance you get is miserable. You get a physio assistant, you get, some of you will know these sorts of things. You can get medical type help. You don't get any help to manage your own recovery. And I couldn't find any books. I've found a couple since. So I decided to write a book called It's All in the Mind, because it happened in the mind, but how you overcome these things is all in the mind. So I wrote this book, partly because it was therapeutic, just to get the information down in a book, and partly because I felt it would be valuable to other people. And I remember a well-known surgeon in Auckland getting in touch with me a year later, saying that he'd read the book and he thought it was great, and he used to cycle, and what could he do about it? And I said, well, just do it. And he got back cycling in no time, because I think you've just got to do it as well. And let me just comment on 2 other things. One is, I think giving back has always been important. Like in our businesses, the recruitment businesses, we had this little philosophy with the 4 C's. One was candidates, people looking for jobs. One was consultants, which was staff. One was clients, which are the people that employ them. And the 4th one was the community. So we've always worked on doing things that give back to the community. And then the last passionate thing, I suppose, a more recent one, I mean, going way back, I always enjoyed going to France. And now loving cycling in France and living in France with my best buddy Trisha over here is absolutely wonderful highlight. But before I finish, I wanted to touch on two things. One is a couple of weeks ago, someone sent me a copy of Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, his last speech. And he was saying how it was really regretful. It was saying how he had all the wealth in the world, but he'd abandoned everything else for that. And he wished he'd had friends and family and a real life. So that was one. And the second one, I heard a few years ago on the radio, it's always stuck with me, Deepak Chopra. Most of you will have heard of him anyway. He's a writer, a journalist, a speaker, and a philosopher. Someone asked him on the radio, you know, what's life all about? And he said, and what can you do to make your life more fulfilled? And he basically said two things. One is enjoy your life, and secondly, give back to some other people so they get a better life. And I think those two things tell stories, and they're telling the same story that I'm trying to tell at the same time. So what I'd like to do is thank you all for your support. I feel honoured and overwhelmed by this recognition. When I heard Peter Burns' CV read out today, I thought, we're not in the same league. No, absolutely mind-boggling. And some of the others that have got this award, absolutely mind-boggling. So I do appreciate it, and thank you for the opportunity of coming here tonight and talking to you. Thank you.